Hey guys, welcome back to another video. My name is Tessa and today we are doing my favorite books of 2023. I'm not gonna do like a specific number because I feel like it's hard to do that. I loved so many books, but I'm gonna give you my top books that I loved that I think you guys should read, and I'm also going to break it down into different genres. So if you're more into romance, if you're more into fantasy, if you're more into thrillers, everything like that. So last year I read roughly 60 books, I think a little over 60 books, and we're going to talk about my favorite ones. So let's get into the video. So the first category or genre that I'm starting with are thrillers. I read a lot of thrillers this year and I just have a few that I want to recommend. The first one is more specifically an author, Riley Sager. Anything from him I have loved so far, but specifically thriller wise, the first book I read by him was The House Across the Lake. I adored this book. I feel like I've talked about it several times, but I was just so shocked and I loved every second of it. I was always guessing, I was always wondering what was gonna happen or what the plot twist was, and when it happened, my jaw dropped. I couldn't put the book down, so I 100% recommend The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. So this book follows a woman that was recently widowed, and there's a lot of publicity, I guess you can say, like paparazzi wanting to know. So in order to get away from that, she goes to this house and like a cabin cottage kind of thing, and across the lake is this woman and this husband. She saves this girl that's across the lake from drowning, and they become friends, and the more she kind of watches this house, the more they realize that there's something going on with their relationship, the husband and wife. So it goes from there. The woman across the lake, Catherine, she ends up going missing, and now Casey, the main girl, is trying to figure out what is happening, what's going on. There's so much more to the story, everything like that. So, The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. The next book by Riley Sager I'm going to recommend specifically is The Only One Left. This was actually a recent release last year, so it's fairly new. I saw Haley Pham read this and adore it, and she's the one that got me into Riley Sager, so I went out and I bought it. I loved it. Very, very good. Again, I love his writing. It's so captivating, I guess is the word I can think of, is it just makes me dive into the story. I feel like I'm not even reading, and I loved it. So this book follows the Hope family murders. So there's a string of murders that is associated with the Hope family, and Lenora is unable to speak, but her last home health aide left. She fled, she didn't want to be there, so now Kit is there kind of taking care of her, and one night Kit finds out that she can speak with Lenora through tapping or a typewriter. So she's kind of figuring out that she is able to communicate with Lenora, and Lenora tells her she wants to explain what happened with the murders because no one knows, and Lenora is the only one that survived. So it's very cool. Again, what kind of is happening, who killed who, what really happened. And there's a few things that are a little sketchy that happens. So this one, again, super good. I did love The House Across the Lake a little bit more, but I almost think because it was my first one from him, it's almost like nostalgic at this point that I loved it so much. But this, very, very close second. I loved this book. The next book is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I have not read The Housemaid's Secret yet, so this is the only one I've read, but I do want to read The Housemaid's Secret this year. This book follows a girl named Millie, and she is interviewing to babysit for this family. So this woman is hiring her to clean the house, to take care of the kid, take her to and from school, stuff like that. Things start happening. Very weird things start happening, and The wife is kind of like, I hated her. I hated her so much with like how she was as a character. You can tell from the start her attitude and everything like that, and the husband, and then things start going very weird between Millie and the husband, and it's a very cool story, and it's really not that long, so this is definitely a really good thriller to pick up if you're just getting into it. I feel like I was just as shocked in this book as I have been in a lot of other thrillers, so I really enjoyed this book, and I do recommend The Housemaid specifically by Frida McFadden if you want to read a thriller. I loved these 3 books so much, but those are the only thrillers I'm going to recommend in this video. I do have other ones that I love. Those are just the 3 that stand out from last year that I read. If you want more recommendations, let me know, but let's get into the next genre or category. All right, the next category we are getting into is romance. I read a lot of romance. This was my first year really diving into romance, and I love how quick and easy those reads are. I almost feel like it's a good break if you're reading a lot of fantasy, or if you just want something new that's a little quicker paced. I recommend romance. So let's get into a few of my favorite romance books that I read in 2023 that I think you should read in 2024 if you haven't. All right, so the first book I have to recommend is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. I adored this book. When I tell you, it gave me like nostalgic high school vibes of having fun and the kind of romance flirting that goes on. It is so good. It is so fast. I tabbed some of my favorite parts. I read this dead of summer. I loved sitting outside, kind of getting that fun-free, summery romance read. I loved it. This book follows Liz, and Liz lives next door to her like lifelong childhood friend Wes, and it flash forwards 10 years, and now she's a senior in high school. So all of the last year kind of things, prom, everything like that, and her lifelong crush ends up coming back, Michael. So Michael and Wes end up like kicking it off, they're friends, so she wants Michael to take her to prom. The only way in is to start hanging out with Wes, kind of scheming to get her prom moment. As they do that, a little romance might kick up, so very fast and fun read. Highly recommend this book. The next book I have to recommend is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. I bought this book because Sarah Caroli really talked highly about it. She loved this book, so I went ahead and bought it and figured I'd give it a shot, and let me tell you, I loved this book too. One of my favorite reads from last year. This book follows Macy. She's our main character, and this boy named Elliot. So similar plot in a way that they were really, really close when they were younger, even had like a romance at one point, but something had happened and you don't know what that is that drew them apart. And now as adults, they kind of have a chance for a reunion, and it's taking you through their past romance and what had happened that led up to maybe their breakup, and now them rekindling because they're strangers as adults. You know, they haven't talked to each other in a really long time. So it's taking you through their life, and I just thought it was a very beautiful book. I have never read a Christina Lauren book either, and I really did enjoy it. This book, again, made you feel like you weren't even reading. It was so quick. I highly recommend this as a romance, especially if you're just getting into it. I feel like this would be the perfect book. The next book is none other than Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was my first Emily Henry book that I read last year, and again, dead of summer, I read outside. It was the perfect summer book. I felt like it gave you all of the kind of warm, oceany vibes, and this one discusses Augustus, or Gus, you might have heard him as, and Gus is an author as well as January. So January and Gus are both authors. She ends up going down to stay at like a beach house, and he's her neighbor. And so they're both writers, but they both have kind of like a writer's block, and they bump into each other. So they help each other figure out what to read. She's like a romance writer, he's more of like a historical writer, and it just goes off from there. I loved this book so much. I actually want to reread this book this year, so I think that's what I'm gonna do. I feel like I read so many books that I love, but you always miss little parts here and there. So I would love to go through this book again and reread it and kind of see my thoughts now. But this book was beautiful and everything I wanted. Highly recommend for this year. The next book was also a release last year, and that is Happy Place by Emily Henry. So, second Emily Henry book. I loved it. First of all, the cover, and I did end up going through and tabbing. It gave me all of the summer feels again. It was, and I always talk about this book, so I kind of feel bad, but I'm always going to. I love this book. I feel like anytime I talk about it, yes, it's more of like a romance, but I feel like it's also like a women's literature, and it's giving you like life lessons about adulthood. It's taking you through like friendships while being an adult, because as like someone that just graduated college, it's hard. It's hard to have friendships when you're not seeing everyone in school every single day. And this book, I might also reread this. I don't know. I loved it. Like I said, it gave me all the feels. This book follows Harriet and Wynne, and they were great. They were together since they met in college, and all of a sudden they weren't. And they ended up breaking up like 5 months ago, but they still hadn't told their friends. And so every summer they go down to Maine and they all meet up as friends. And there's a bit of a fake dating kind of thing because they haven't told their friends yet. And Harriet really doesn't want them to know because she's still going through the struggles of it. So goes into like some fake dating. They have the communication and everything like that. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this book. But I loved this book. Probably most definitely going to reread this year. Getting into a bit of a different kind of romance vibe. The first one is The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. This book shocked me. And I don't know if it's just the cover doesn't really scream anything to me. I didn't really feel drawn by it, but I heard so much on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok about this book. So I figured whatever, I'll give it a go and see kind of what I think about it. This book, I'm so shocked that I enjoyed it as much as I did. I cried, I laughed, it was so good. This girl, her brother is in the military and she's kind of feeling lonely. She has 2 kids, but she's not with the husband anymore or the dad, and so she's feeling lonely, and she asks her brother to give her someone to write to. She doesn't really care. And her brother gives her this guy named Beckett. So they're writing letters back and forth. They've never met each other. They have no idea about each other, but they're writing for months and months. And all of a sudden, it's mostly following Ella, but it also gives Beckett's point of view, which I really like. Something happens and it's awful. And so it just goes, I don't want to give away too much about this book because for me, I went into it not knowing anything. I had no idea what to expect, and I felt like that was really nice because I really had no prior thoughts or expectations. So yes, Beckett and Ella start like writing back and forth. Something happens and it goes on from there. All right, 2 more romance books. First one you've probably heard about as well, and that is The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. I really enjoyed these books. There are 3 of them, and each of them follow a different brother. It kind of talks about what they do as a living, I guess, and it's all tied to this inheritance that their grandpa was going to give out. And so each book follows a different person, so there's a different kind of romance in each of them. This one is more, whereas the next one is like a fake dating, and then the third one is more of like a single mom trope slash lifelong friends slash they liked each other kind of thing. So These books are really fun and fast, and they're pretty big, so you get a lot of information and feelings throughout the book. So not specifically this book, I think I enjoyed the last one the most, but this series in general I would recommend if you really want to get into a romance. These are not so heavy. It has kind of a plot as well, if that makes sense. The last book slash series I'm recommending is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This is more plot with a sub-romance plot, and I really enjoyed this. It's fun, it's different. So this book follows Pip, who is in high school, and a while back this lady, or this girl, was murdered by her boyfriend, and then her boyfriend also died, and now she's kind of rejoining that scene, and she's trying to figure out what really happened. Did the boyfriend actually kill her? Who killed who? So it's very fun and fast. Again, there's 3 books for this book, and I loved the first and the second a lot. The third is also really good, highly rated as well. So this is the last romance book I would recommend if you want to start reading, but like you don't want to go full on romance right away. This kind of is a gradual romance. Okay guys, into the last category or genre, and that is fantasy. I love fantasy. I'm a fantasy girly, romantasy, anything like that. So I did read a lot of fantasy this year. So I figured this is probably going to be the biggest grouping of books, but here we go. Again, not every book I loved in general, just like my top books that I read last year that I think everyone who loves fantasy should read. So getting into one of the last books I read last year, A Serpent in the Wings of Night. This was my first like vampire fantasy book, and I loved it. It was so fun, so different, kind of like a Hunger Games-esque feeling, and also almost like enemies to lovers. I really enjoyed this. Very high action and a fast read. There is a second book that is already out, but the hardcover's not out yet, so I haven't read it yet, but I know Kindle Unlimited has it, so maybe I will read this and then buy the hardcover later on. But like I said, I really enjoyed this book, and I think you guys would too. It's different. It's not, you know, the same as every other book. It gives you a little bit of something different. This is Throne of the Fallen. First of all, stunning cover. I have never read one of her books. I am so bad at pronouncing her name. Carrie Maniscalco. This was super fun. It incorporates like the 7 deadly sins. So there's envy, sloth, everything like that, all of them, and they're all brothers. So this one follows Envy and this girl named Camilla, and Envy gets this message basically saying that this game is about to start that kind of goes on every single year, and Camilla is being blackmailed. So they have to come together, visit the different brothers, and figure out what's happening, and they kind of go on a mission together. So this is really fun, very cute. Romance in this book, of course, and I really enjoyed it. The next book is actually Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is another one that very much shocked me, and I wouldn't put this under fantasy. It's more of like a magic element with some romance in it. Iris is a newspaper writer, like they have typewriters, so she writes articles for the paper, and Roman Kit is a guy that's also there, and they're competing for this title, and she goes off to like this army of the gods kind of thing, so it's almost like she's going to the front of the war to write about what's happening, and it kind of goes on from there. There's magical typewriters. She sends a letter, it ends up in his house, and they're writing to each other, but they don't know who each other are, and it's very cute. And there was a second book that came out last year. I enjoyed it. I loved this one, I think, more. But Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Fourth Wing. I know a lot of people talked about this, and it's not the best romance fantasy book that's ever come out. I feel like there's a lot of people that are OG book tubers that really don't think this is a great book, but then there's other ones that love it. I really enjoyed it. I have never read a book with dragons before, and it was fast. It gave me everything I wanted: the romance element, the action element, wondering what's gonna happen. Highly recommend this book. Iron Flame came out last year, and that was not as great of a book, but there's a bigger jump between the second and the third book. So I'm hoping that book really kicks it off and I really enjoy it. But I loved Fourth Wing. Very fast. This is by Rebecca Yarros. I don't know if I said that, but Fourth Wing. The next fantasy book I'm recommending is Dance of Thieves. This is a duology written by Mary E. Pearson, or Pearson. There's two books. There's Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves. I really like these books. I had them for a very long time. I feel like even before they kind of became popular and people started talking about them more, they kind of intrigued me. So I had already owned it. And I read this. I loved it. For it being a duology, sometimes it sucks because I really want the series to keep going and it ends and it's like, oh gosh. But it's fun, impactful, action. That's why I think I love fantasy so much, is there's so much happening, but there's also that romance element. So Dance of Thieves, really recommend. Again, it's a duology, so if you don't want to get into like a 5-book series, this is the one for you. It gives you just enough and leaves you satisfied. Powerless by Lauren Roberts. When I tell you guys, I love this book. I will probably reread this year too, just because I want to go through and actually annotate it. I adored this book, almost like a Hunger Games-esque book as well. It follows Peyton and this guy named Kai, and they are, again, kind of going against each other, trying to win this game, but something sparks between them. There's banter in it. It's funny. I loved it. And the second book comes out this year, so I'm so excited. The last few books are all by the same author. I bet you can think of what I'm talking about. First one, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I loved this book series. It encapsulates everything. I feel like I was in a whole nother world every time I picked it up. I read this series in a week. A week? Do you guys understand how long those books are? I could not put it down. I adored every second of it. This is a series I do want to reread in the future, just so I can go back through, and there's so much foreshadowing that I never realized until, like, you know, after it happened. I'm like, oh my gosh, this happened in the first book and it's connected to the last book, you know? So I love Sarah J. Maas's writing. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. The next book by Sarah J. Maas I'm going to recommend is Throne of Glass. So I kind of talked about this in previous videos. I did like a halfway through all of the books I read. I did all of the books I read, you know, last year and talked about these books. But Throne of Glass is a book that I had actually read years ago, like, oh, I was going to say 6, but it's been longer than that now. I read them in primary school or like middle school. I read Assassin's Blade, Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire, all back then. So believe it, I was a stan then, and the books were still coming out then. So I had ended up stopping. I was buying the books as they were coming out. I just couldn't read because I was in school. So Throne of Glass, I actually ended up reading this all last year as well, and I loved it. This is a bit different from ACOTAR. I feel like ACOTAR is very heavy on the romance, whereas this is really heavy on the action plot kind of thing, and I loved that. This book is so good. It gives you everything you want. Again, with the foreshadowing, it is crazy how in the first book she talks about one thing and it connects to the, you know, the 6th book. I don't get that. Her brain, I need to see what is going on in there. But Throne of Glass. The last book I'm going to recommend by Sarah J. Maas, just because I feel like I can't leave it out, is the Crescent City books. So this is House of Earth and Blood. These books are really big. Really, really big. I think 800 or 900 pages. 800 pages each. Very big books. But it gives you more of that, her writing. I think that's what I'm I adore is her writing and how she comes up with her plots and what happens. These books were really fun. I did enjoy the second one more, and there were a few spots where I'm like, why are these books so long? But like 200 pages into this, I was like, okay, I understand why she, you know, had those first 200 pages. I really enjoyed these. So that is the last fantasy book I am going to recommend for you guys to read. If you guys have any other recommendations that you don't see on my shelf perhaps, or that I didn't talk about that you want to kind of recommend to someone in the comments, please go ahead. I want some recommendations. I'm always looking for new books, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of late into July or January, but I feel like with favorite books it doesn't really matter when you post it. And let me know any of your thoughts on any of these books. Message me, like this video if you want more videos like this. If you want to see more, subscribe. I am trying to post every Friday, but I do want to start posting twice a week. It just might be a little up and down for the first few weeks. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.